What up, though, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Lawrence Report. And first of all, I just want to apologize to my subscribers, y'all. I know I have not been posting a lot of content. It's just that your boy has been tired with his other job, actually. So I feel well rested now, and I'm ready to get back into the swing of things. But tonight, we will be discussing BMF episode 2. And with this episode right here, the antithesis of this episode is basically about the plugs, right? There's been some crazy situations with the plugs, some people getting arrested, and now Meech and Terry are both scrambling, trying to make things work in Detroit and Atlanta as well. Now, this episode right here, it's up a lot of storylines for this episode. We got Meech and Terry when it comes to them trying to figure out the situation with the new plugs. We got Detective Brian and, the situation with his son, how he's about to do some dirty work. We got Lucille finding a new love interest. We got Terry and his situation when it comes to LaWanda and Markeisha. It's a lot of storylines in this episode. Oh, and we got Angel. We got Angel, Meech, and Greenie. That's another storyline in itself right there. Those big three. So it's a lot of storylines intertwined in this episode right here. So in episode 2, we see Terry. He is basically trying to play house with Markeisha, for lack of better terms, right? And she's like, well, I'm glad you arrived. And he's gonna move all this stuff into the house or whatever. She's like, I'm glad you arrived, but I don't think we can be together. And reason why she's saying this because she's still married to Boone, right? Keep in mind, they ended up getting shot, and she almost lost her life because of her relationship with Terry, right? So for her, she breaks the bad news to him. He ain't trying to hear it. But he's like, listen, if that's what you want to do, if you need a break, it is what it is. I'll go about my merry way. And he leaves her. So remember when I said, this episode right here is basically going to be talking about the plugs, right? So Terry is watching the news, whatever, and there's like a news alert that comes on, and he sees that one of their plugs from the last season, Cena Delgado, he basically ended up getting popped for selling drugs, right? So that's when Terry and Meech, they have this phone conversation about what they're going to do next about their current situation with their plugs. And at the same time, before we even get to the phone conversation, at the same time, there are these two Hispanic men, right? They end up coming to Meech and Terry's parents' house, right? And the dad is there, Charles. And these two men, they come in, they say, Dimitri? That's, they're looking for Dimitri or whatever, Meech, right? He's like, the dad is like, no, you guys have the wrong house. And they still believe that this is the current house. And these guys right here, they try to barge inside. And Charles is like, yo, you don't understand English, but I got this hammer right here. Do you understand this right here? Now, Charles is basically kind of stressed out because I'm like, listen, nobody wants drug dealers coming to their house, but unfortunately, that is the name of the game that the family is unfortunately involved into. You see, now that, Meech is down there in Atlanta and Terry's is still down there in Detroit, both these guys have got to figure out how to maneuver the best way they can when it comes to this plug situation, right? So Meech, he is, having this conversation with Stax, aka 2 Chainz character, and he's talking about the MKs, the Latino brothers or whatever, and they're talking about the situation with Glock, right? Meech is basically trying to get in good spirits with Glock and trying his best to figure out a way to maneuver the current weight that he has, right? And of course, 2 Chainz character Stack is like, yo, listen, if you need me to help out, you need me to step up to the plate, I got y'all. As far as Detective Brian, he is in a little bit of trouble himself. I think it's more of a financial burden for him, a financial strain, right? So we end up meeting his wife, which is basically played by Cynthia Bailey. Y'all know her from the Real Housewives of Atlanta franchise or whatever. And they're basically coming together trying to figure out how can they pay for little Kevin when it comes to the lawyer fees or whatever, right? And they both agree that they both kind of screwed up the family that they have, right? And at the same time, Officer Brian is kind of like in a need for some money. And his ex-wife, Cynthia Bailey's character, she basically give him some money to try to help out, but it's not going to be enough to pay for these lawyer fees. And unfortunately for Detective Brian, he is in such of a dire need to get his son released. He's willing to do any type of dirty work. And he ends up meeting basically a former dirty cop, and he's basically telling, this former cop that, listen, I can't afford these lawyers. I need some financial help. If I have to do some dirty work, I will, right? And they end up having this meeting, and eventually, the way it's looking, Detective Brian is about to do a dirty dance with the devil. And as far as Lucille and the family, they're at this new church, basically. For lack of better terms, they left the old church that they was a member at, which was, it was Snoop Dogg. He was playing the pastor last season, but they ended up leaving that church now that it's new church, right? And, the pastor saying that, they need some volunteers for this event that they're having, this medical event that they have coming up, right? And, we happen to see Nicole, the daughter. She's over there making googly eyes at this other young boy, right? And the parents, Lucille and Charles, they start to notice this right here. But, it's crazy how in this episode here, we do see a new beginning of love for Nicole. Because you remember Nicole, she was dealing with a situation, I believe was in the previous season, I believe, where, she was closest one young man, but he ended up dying due to crazy Lamar, right? And at the same time, we see Lucille, she is going to be getting her swerve on in this episode. So the two not young ladies, but the two women in this episode, in this family right here, are about to take on new beginnings when it comes to love and relationships. And I'm so happy for Lucille, right? She has been through a lot of just bad things when it comes to Charles and raising these kids, that Lucille was officially about to get her swerve on, right? So while they're at this medical tent thing that they're working on, she ends up meeting an old classmate by the name of Dr. Maurice, right? This guy comes in with his white jacket, chocolate skin, very smooth, very suave, and he's like, is that Lucille? She's like, yeah, that's me, and again, they're old classmates from back in the day. And, Lucille, she's all giggly eyed and she's just giggling left and right about meeting this doctor who she hasn't seen in quite some time. He's like, yo, listen, I'd love to get up with you. If that's okay, please do not leave without me, at least taking you out to lunch, right? And again, Lucille is on cloud nine after seeing this doctor, right? Because, her and Charles have been going through it and she needs a new start, a new love life. So again, I am happy for Lucille, basically about to get her swerve on in these next couple episodes. So I'm excited about that for her. So now we switch gears to Terry, right? He's basically meeting up with this plug over there at the township, and he believes that this person may end up being a male. Heck, I thought it was a male myself, right? But of course, we saw the trailer. We knew that it was going to be a stone cold female that was getting ready to flip the script on everybody in this episode right here. Royal Oak, that is a new plug that they're looking for on this part of town. She is stone cold bad to the bone, right? She ends up getting into this little scuffle, this little argument with this guy who's basically judging her because she's a female in the dope game, right? So she basically, ends up speaking her mind. He don't like that right there, right? They get into that scuffle, into an argument, and that's when she ends up seeing T, right? They end up meeting, and, he's like, listen, I'm in dire need. I need some weight. And she offers him a number. And, of course, he's like, wait, are you kidding me right now? Like, you charging an arm and a leg for the weight that you're talking about. But, again, T is pretty desperate, right? So he ain't got no choice but to accept the offer that she is putting on the table. Eventually, he does. Now, as far as Meech, he's still trying to make the connection with Glock and his intel. And, he's back at a strip club with Greenie, a.k.a. Neo's character. And, Greenie is trying to make sure that, hey, there's no beef between, Meech and himself. And, they try to, patch things up, right? And at the same time, we meet Angel, right? And she's going to play a very important role in this episode of BMF. And, while they're meeting Angel, she's basically the headliner of the strip club, right? She's basically the #1 girl. If you've ever been to a strip club, you know how they always have the elite girls, maybe the top 5, and then the rest of them are just regular girls, right? But Angel is the headliner. And, of course, Meech falls in love, right, as soon as he sees her. But he figures out, I think the closest way I can get to Glock is by doing it with Angel, who is a key player in this episode right here, especially when it comes to just a stripper network and just a stripper network in itself. That's basically what Meech is saying. Shortly after that, we end up getting a standoff between these Latino brothers who basically end up coming. These were the guys who came to Charles's house, right? And there's a standoff between these guys right here and Terry's crew. And again, these guys are looking for Dimitri, right? AKA Meech. And he tells him, well, Terry ends up telling these Latino brothers that, hey, if you want Meech, you gotta go down there to Atlanta. And these Latino brothers are basically saying, that we know Ty Washington, like we're kind of like, some of Ty Washington's crew, right? But still, I think that Meech and them are not understanding that, but they will understand that later on in the episode, how these guys are connected to Ty Washington. Meech, he finally gets up with Angel, right? They end up going on a little dinner date. And again, he's trying to get some information on Glock, right? He's trying to get all his P's and Q's and Meech, he finally ends up getting this date with Angel, right? And it turns out, Angel, and Meech, he finally ends up getting his date with Angel, right? He's trying to get the intel on the Glock situation. And, when it comes to Angel, she doesn't really want to give up the information because she's like, listen, Greenie, aka Neo's character, he took me in when I was basically a nobody. I came from a bad childhood. This man has looked out for me. And, my discretion, my livelihood is basically on the line if I give up, all this intel information when it comes to Glock. But of course, Meech, being the smooth talker that he is, he does end up eventually getting all the information he needs when it comes to Glock. Back at a strip club, we see Duffy, Stacks, and Meech. They're talking, and Stacks is basically saying, hey, I got some boys, they took care of that weight for me. We all got mouths to feed. I was going to look out for the crew. And Meech is like, yeah, I appreciate that. When Duffy's like, yo, did you still get the information when it comes to Glock and the plug, right? He's like, Meech is like, no, I ain't got it yet. But Meech, he ends up turning around. He ends up seeing Angel get into this confrontation with this guy who's basically being a little bit too aggressive in the strip club. And Meech comes over like a knight in shining armor, and he basically saves Angel, right? And when Angel sees that, she's like, wow, this dude is legit. He's a stand-up guy. And she's like, well, let me dance for you. He ends up getting the dance, right? He also gets the plug's name, who is Santiago. And, Angel tells Meech about the location, which is basically the Havana house. And of course, out of the corner, we see Neo's character. He's looking, he's like, whoa. Hold on. I don't like this right here. So Greenie, I can't think of his name, but Greenie. Yeah, Greenie, Neo's character, he's not feeling that. When he looks over, he ends up seeing Angel and Meech close together. And I didn't even see this coming right here myself. So Blaze is the person who Officer Brian was talking to when it comes to him trying to get some extra work, right? But he has a daughter by the name of Henrietta. That's her real name. The daughter is basically trying to run her own show, but, the father, Blaze, he lets her know that I have somebody coming to work for you, who was basically Detective Brian. He's like, listen, put this man to work, and at the same time, I noticed that you've been out here trying to wild out, trying to make a name for yourself. I need you to calm all that down before you blow up our operation. You know how it is whenever somebody is going to take over the throne eventually. The daughter Henrietta is basically going to take over Blaze's spot eventually when he passes on, right? But again, she's out here wilding out, about to blow up the entire operation. But he tells her to cool her jets for the sake of the operation. So we see Duffy and Meech, they're going to this Havana location, trying to figure out what's going on when it comes to this plug Santiago, right? And it turns out we end up seeing the two guys who we saw from earlier, who was basically the guys who was at Meech's parents' house, right? And he tells them that, listen, I'm here to help y'all out. I know Ty Washington, but there's some miscommunication going on. And actually, there's actually a gun shootout that's actually happening, unfortunately. But then they come to a realization that, Meech comes to the realization that, hey, you're supposed to be my plug. He's like, well, how did you know? He's like, well, Terry told me to come up here and find you. So them two right there, they automatically start bonding. Man, back at the strip club, Duffy thinks that it was basically Angel who set them up with this meeting with the MKs, right? And Neo, well, I keep saying Neo, Greeny, I'm gonna say Greeny. Greeny, he ends up seeing Meech, and he's like, drinks is on the house for everybody, right? Because I appreciate you guys, stepping up to the plate for Angel. But again, it's some jealousy that is forming, I believe, with Meech and Greeny. We're going to see how those two play out. And I know I spoke about, this new plug, Loco, who Meech is now working with, and how they're bonding. They end up sharing, their upbringings and, how he came on the boat to try to get here. And how Meech is talking about how he had cardboard in the bottom of his shoes. And, we at the end of this episode, we see Meech, he's basically relaxed and he's on cloud nine that, hey, maybe stuff is going to work out for me down here in Atlanta. Maybe it's going to be not as bad of a transition as I thought, but we gonna see. Because I feel like I feel like none of these characters really can be trusted. I just feel like Terry and Meech are always going to be solid together. I don't know if they can trust the people around them, but again, as the series progresses, we're gonna find out who's trustworthy and who is untrustworthy. So please comment below, what was your favorite scene of this episode of BMF? For me, I did love the ending with Meech finding a new brother in arms when it comes to doing what they do. I also love his relationship that he's forming with Angel. And also I love Lucille, meeting this old friend who was a doctor. So those are probably my 3 favorite scenes from this episode. And as always, thank you for tuning in to The Lawrence Report.